This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, good. So let's get started on Sefer Bamidbar, the book of Bamidbar, and certainly Bamidbar as we are working our way into Shavuos, which will be this Saturday night, Sunday, and Sunday night, Monday. Bamidbar is always read right before Shavuos. Okay, always read before Shavuos. And of course, we know that the Torah was given to us in the Midbar, in the desert. Okay, the Torah was given to us in the desert. And it's interesting, as we have holiness ascribed to the place where the Betamikdash stood, right? And that was this past Sunday was Yom Yerushalayim, when we were able to return to the last remnant that we have of the Beis Hamikdash, which is the Kotel HaMa'aravi, right? The Western Wall, right? The world might call it the Wailing Wall. We don't call it the Wailing Wall. To us, it is a wall of hope, a wall of fortitude, of a wall that represents the constant presence and the unswaying determination and that starting point of the rebuilding. That's what the wall represents to us, and that is the holiness of the Beit HaMikdash, of the area behind there, which is, of course, is the Temple Mount. Right now there is a mosque on there, but that is our Temple Mount, and if one goes to Israel and goes through the tunnel tours, as they are called, where they've excavated, so that little swath of the Kotel, actually there's a whole area that goes underneath there, and that wall is a small swath of a much larger wall, and the tunnel tours take you underneath along that wall, and there you actually get to a point where you are right across from the Holy of Holies, and that is the closest point to which a person can halakhically come now to where the Holy of Holies was. So we ascribe much continued holiness to that area, even though the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, has been destroyed. However, we say Kedusha Rishona Kitcha Lashata v'Kitcha Latid Lavo. The holiness of that temple was there while it stood, and that holiness continues Latid Lavo for all time until the rebuilding of the third temple. Right, this Shavuos night, our learning is going to be focused on messianic times and the mentions and the ideas of Mashiach that are mentioned throughout the Navi, and the false prophet, the false Mashiachs that we've had, what the requirements are for the real Mashiach, and how it all started off in the Torah, where we have nods towards the Mashiach in the Torah, and the Navi Yechezkel is mostly based with the actual dimensions of the third temple. So there we have much holiness that is ascribed there. However, when it comes to Mount Sinai, out in the desert, there is no Kedusha that is attached to it. We're not sure which mountain it is. We think we know which mountain it is, when in the 1980s, before the Camp David Accords, where Israel relinquished the Sinai Peninsula in exchange for a peace treaty with Egypt. Before that, I went with the Sochnut, the Jewish agency, on a 5-day Sinai tour, and we climbed Mount Sinai and davened up there in the morning, right? What we think is Mount Sinai. It was a little bit of a letdown, because when I got to the top there was a bathroom that was set up over there. I guess you kind of need that, right? If you can have people davening there, you need to have restroom facilities. But to me, it was a little anticlimactic to climb Mount Sinai and come to a men's room over there. So there is no lasting kedusha that we have over there. But the Torah was given in a midbar, and that is something that I think has or could contain many different thoughts and lessons for us. So, what are some of your thoughts? Why would the Torah have been given out in a desert? Right? Midbar is often described as a wilderness. I know when I think of wilderness, I think of pictures of Hawaiian Islands, lush Hawaiian Islands. You think of the of Jurassic Park. That's what I think of when I think of a wilderness. But here we're talking about a desert. So why was the Torah given in a desert? What are some of the thoughts that we can glean from that? Yes.
Well, one thought I have is that it is barren and there are no distractions. And so you're really able to just be surrounded by holiness if that's what you're going to be surrounded with. And there you are with Hashem and nothing else really.
Yeah. I think that's an excellent point, Cheryl. Right. In other words, there are two different aspects. Right. One is the distractions that we have, that our regular life is filled with so many distractions. You mentioned the air conditioner repairman might be coming, and then our phones beep, and right, all these things are constantly going on, and a person can become so busied with things and with stuff, and just always being busy without ever really time and the energy to really focus on, why am I alive? What is the point of life? Right? I believe in a God, so why did God put me here? Why is this world happening? And why have different events that have happened to me? Why might they have happened? What are the lessons that I can learn from those events? As we've discussed in the past, God does speak to us. He doesn't speak to us at this point through a navi, a prophet speaking to us, but events do speak to us. So on one hand, right, the desert removes all of the different busyness, all the hecticness and busyness that this world almost seems to bombard us with. And there's also, I think, another aspect also of what you said, and that is, I think we feel God most when we are not looking at all the things that mankind has created, but when we're able to just see the world as the world is, then we're much more easily able to connect to God and to feel God's presence. Right? When sunrise is not by a high rise, it's a lot easier to feel God's presence in the world. And when we're coming over here, we had that, interesting. We had that back in Bereshit for a moment. If you turn back to page 48 in our stone Chumash, which is Parsha Noach, Perek Yud Aleph, chapter 11. And let's take a look at 40. Let's take a look at the English over there. The whole earth was of one language and of common purpose. And it came to pass when they migrated from the east, they found a valley in the land of Shinar and settled there. They said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them in fire. And the bricks serve them as stone, and the bitumen serve them as mortar. Right? So why are we going into all this detail? Let us make bricks, burn them in fire, and the brick was stone, and the bitumen is mortar, right? So what's happening here is we're getting into technology, right? Tower of Babel level stage technology, but let the bricks serve as stone, meaning when I'm using stone, I recognize where did these stones come from? These stones come from God's earth, and I'm utilizing these stones. But when I am making bricks, that's already my creation. The bricks serve them as Vatiya lahem alavena la'aven. That became their stones, meaning I can use my technology. I don't so much need God anymore. I can remove God from the picture. You know, the joke I like to tell of a person who challenges God to a duel and says, God, I challenge you to a duel. Whatever you can do, I can do. So God says, oh, yeah, all right, I'll go first. And God gathers some earth, forms in the shape of a person, blows in a breath, and creates a human being. The person says, no big deal. He starts to gather some earth, and God said, no, 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 no. Use your own earth. Make your own earth, right? So when we start making our own things, we start to feel that we can cut God out of the whole picture. We no longer need God involved over there. And that's what happened over there by the Tower of Babel. But when we are there in this barren wilderness, I remember when I went to Sinai, there was this naked, barren beauty of the landscape. It wasn't lush, but it was overwhelming. And when we are in such areas, we have that sunset, that sunrise, we have that desert, we have that ocean. So then we come in contact with, we feel that pure, unadulterated God's creations. And they are so, so overwhelming. So when we're coming now to receive the Torah, we needed to be in this heightened spiritual state. Good. Another idea. Yes.
The other thing I'm thinking about is that not only were we in the middle of the desert where there is nothing, but we didn't have to do anything. Our clothes stayed fine. Our shoes never needed mending. We didn't have to cook and prepare food or anything. So we
Beautiful.
had really no distractions of like necessities that we had to do. Everything
Yeah.
was provided for us.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an excellent point. So we're in the desert. We're in the desert, which is an environment that does not easily support human life in terms of food, in terms of water, in terms of clothing and things like that, in terms of protection from the sun. And yet we were living in this desert in a supernatural way. That's the holiday of Sukkot, whereas Pesach is the event of the Exodus from Egypt and the event of the splitting of the sea, and Shavuot is the event of Mount Sinai. Sukkot is the 40-year event of our being in the Midbar and God taking care of us. So as we're going to accept the Torah, I think that's very, very important. We need to realize that we are in God's hands, right? even when we think that, yeah, but I'm going to work from 9 to 5 and I'm earning my money and I'm going to the store and I'm getting my clothing and I'm paying my rent and my mortgage. So I've got the roof over my head, and I'm going to the grocery store and I'm using my hard-earned money to buy my groceries, to buy the food for myself, my family. With all of that, we need to realize that those are all just layers of obfuscation. And in fact, it is God that is giving it to us. So therefore, it was very important that as we are receiving the Torah, to recognize and appreciate that we are in God's hands. And just like over there in the Midbar, where we can't exist there but for the grace of God, do even when we have all of these different involvements and steps that we take, hishtadlut, as it's called, the efforts that we make, we have to recognize that with all those efforts, what we have is actually a gift from God, and to see through those different layers. I was just talking with somebody yesterday about the Amidah, and we take 3 steps back and we take 3 steps forward, and then we say the Amidah. So why the 3-step maneuver? And there are lots of different explanations. One explanation, the simplest explanation, is that we need to recognize that with the Amidah, we're moving into a different zone. We're entering into a different place, a different phase. And whereas, no problem, Cheryl, whereas, right, so whereas until that point we're talking about God, comes the Amidah, and then we are talking directly to God, right? And there is His presence. So we're walking into that. We're entering into a different sort of zone. But there is another explanation that's also given, and that is that we view God as hiding himself in this world. God hides himself in this world in order for us to find him. And that's why the Hebrew word for world is olam. And the shoresh, the root of that, is ayin lamed mem, alam, which means hidden. So God hides himself in the world for us to then make that effort and make sure that we see him, we discern him in all the confusion and smoke screens of this world. So we take 3 steps back, and that is we are mirroring God's actions that he, so to speak, took 3 steps back, and then we take 3 steps forward to say that we're going to see through that world mask. We're going to see through that smoke screen, and we're going to connect to God. So the Torah being given in the Midbar is to make us realize that we are fully in God's hands over here, and we need to see through the smoke screen. And even when we have all these different layers of concealment, we take our 3 steps forward and say, Baruch Atah Hashem. Blessed are you, Hashem. We're not going to be fooled, deceived by all these layers. So it took place there in the Midbar, where we were fully dependent on God to make us realize that is how we are living. And also we say about the Torah, Ki Hem Chayenu. The Torah is our life, V'orech Yameinu, and the length of our days. That the Torah is what actually gives life and gives sustenance to this world. That is what brings down. On Shabbos morning, we say the Tehillim of Kilo Olam Chasdo. And we have over there 26, I believe, Kili Olam Chasdos. And that Kilo Olam Chasdo means because La'olam, or that La'olam, for all eternity, is God's kindness. And that corresponds to the 26 generations of the world before the Torah was given. And those 26 generations existed solely on God's chesed, God's kindness, because we were not yet earning it, so to speak. But through our involvement in Torah, study of Torah, observance of Torah mitzvot, so now we have this effect. We've been studying this a bit in our Derech Hashem class. We have this effect that it affects up the heavens, and then it works its way down into this world. So we are earning. So perhaps the Torah had to be given in a midbar to make us realize that kihem chayenu, that the Torah is what gives us our life. The Torah is what gives us our sustenance. Another aspect, I think, is that in midbar there were no other people around, no other nations around. What might be some of the lessons that we gain from that in terms of the Torah being given, not in an area where there were other peoples and other nations around? Some ideas we can glean from that. Good morning, Esther. We're discussing the Torah having been given in a midbar, in a desert, and we've discussed a number of different aspects of what we can glean from that. And now we're bringing up the idea that there were no other peoples around, no other nations around when we received the Torah. Why might that be important? What can we glean from that?
Maybe because we are set apart from other people. We have different
Okay.
standards and jobs to do than other people.
Okay. So it's
And
interesting. Am Badad Yashav, a nation that will sit alone, right? You know, is that how it's meant to be? Is that the ideal, right? On one hand, we're supposed to be an or la'amim, a light unto the nations, and it's hard to be a light to the other nations if they don't see us,
they
right?
do, yes, but not in a good way.
Okay, so I think there is a lot there. I think there is a lot there. In other words, certainly on one level, we have to recognize that it's us, the Torah, and God, right? That is what sets our standards. That is what establishes our morality, our right and wrong, not the constant whims of society, because and very often changing in not necessarily the best way in terms of things that are considered fine, acceptable, normal, right? The world, we can't be dependent on the world. There's a beautiful teaching that we have that when Shlomo Melech, King Solomon, when he built the Betamikdash, so there were windows in the Betamikdash. Now, typically, if you have a thick wall, so simply the window inside, the dimensions of the window inside and outside would be the same. It would be a perfect square. But in fact, that's not normally how things were built. Whether it's for protection, very often the way it would be built is that it would be, how would they do it? It would be small on the outside and expanding larger on the inside. And that way the light comes in, right? It'll be better protected, right? They can't really shoot in over there, but the light will then and fill the room over there, right? That's how normally a window would be built. The Beit HaMikdash was fascinating. The Beit HaMikdash was, the windows were on the inner wall, the dimensions were very small, and on the outside the dimensions were large. And that's because the Betamikdash does not need the light, but rather the world needs the light of the Beit HaMikdash. So perhaps it was given to us in a midbar, and we were detached, right, distant from other peoples, other nations, other societies, because we can't gain our influence and our morals and our values from them. We need to share our teachings, morals, and values. They need to gain from us. We can't go by the world's standards, the world's values. Also, I think we need to realize that at times, right, we need to go at it alone. And even if we will be shunned or dismissed because of our beliefs, so be it, right? We need to be willing to go at it alone, and to recognize that there will be, for much of our history, we will not have the arm around the shoulder by our other brother nations around us. But we will have to really deal with a lot of antagonism and a lot of antipathy, and we have to be proud of who we are, and ready to go at it alone. I love a story. I believe a story with Rabbi Twersky, that he was on a Saturday night. He was still in his full Hasidic Shabbos regalia, right, with a long black coat and a fur hat that he would wear, a shtreimel, in his full Hasidic regalia. And he's standing there, and a woman approaches him and says to him, this is the story as I've heard it, and says to him, "You are such an embarrassment. You are such a disgrace to all Jews. You walk around in this outdated costume, looking so ridiculous, so out of touch with the world as it is, and you make all of us Jews look so bad." And he turned to her and he said, "I doth beggeth thy pardon, but I do not understandeth thy words. For you see, I am from the Amish, and this is the manner in which we have been dressing for generations." And this poor Jewish woman almost fell off her feet. I beg your forgiveness. I beg your pardon. I have only the utmost respect for the Amish people, who keep to their traditions and keep to their history and don't bend to the whims of society. So after she finished pontificating for a while, he said to her, "Well, actually, I'm Jewish like you. But why is it that you can appreciate keeping to traditions and keeping to our way when it comes to others, but not when it comes to ourselves?" Right? And the Midbar teaches us that we have to go our own way, and we need to be proud of who we are, and not feel that we've got to bend to the whims of society. Right? And I think also the Torah was given to us. Right? We have Taryag mitzvot. It contains within it also teachings for the nation. There are the Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach, the 7 Noahide commandments. So the Torah is for them also. When people come to me to convert, I let them know, right? You don't need to convert in order to have a relationship with God. You don't need to convert in order to have an afterlife. You have your Sheva mitzvah b'nei Noach. There are the 7 Noahide commandments, which gives a non-Jew their pathways of connection to God. But we need to realize that the Torah in its entirety, the Taryag mitzvot, that is something that was given to us. Morasha Kihilat Yaakov. Morasha is defined either as an inheritance or also Mu'urasa, betrothed. It is a wedding. It is a relationship that God made with Kihilat Yaakov. And therefore, this was a private, intimate affair that Hashem had made with us. Good. So those are all, I think, excellent ideas you've brought up as to why the Torah was given to us in the Midbar, in the desert. Any other ideas? If not, we can go a little bit further. Okay, so this is the Sefer that we're starting now, the fourth of the five books of the Torah. This is Sefer, alternately called Bamidbar, right? And in English, it's called the Book of Numbers, and it's also called Sefer HaPekudim, right? And it is the book that is filled, at least begins with, and is filled with lots of countings. So now we're on page 726. And we're going to start with counting each of the tribes. And then let's begin with that. The tribe of Levi was not included in that count. And then we're going to get into the Degalim, which we will deal with also briefly. But it's interesting to note, let's begin over here now, 726, Bamidbar Aleph Aleph. Hashem spoke to Moshe Bamidbar Sinai, in the Midbar of Sinai, Be'ohel Moed, in the Ohel Moed, in the tent of meeting, Be'echad LaChodesh Hasheni, on the first day of the second month, B'Shana Hashenit, of the second year of our leaving Egypt. And he said there, Su'u et Rosh Kol Adat B'nei Yisroel, Lemishpichotam. Su'u, right, the English says take a census. But what does Su'u actually mean? Su'u means, right, we sing, Su'u Sha'arim Rashechem, Upitzchu Ba'elam, Su'u Sha'arim, lift up, gates, lift up, right? V'yavo melech hakavod, and let the king of honor come through. Su'u means to lift up. So why do we have the term lifting up when it comes to counting? What is the connection between lifting up, su'u, and counting? What would you say, my friends? What is the connection between su'u, lifting up, and counting?
Well, it's the same thing like with the Omer counting, because we're building up.
Okay.
And
so with the Omer, we're counting up in our days because we ourselves are meant to be building up. Like we discussed, we don't want to count down to zero. Then
right.
You've got zero at the end. We want to build up 49 to get to the 50th. Good. So counting, when I count you, saying is you have importance. You make a difference. So therefore, su'u, I really like lifting up the person, right? You know, it's interesting. In English also, I count a person, or that person really counts, right? Which means that person is of importance. So su'u, when we count an individual, we're letting that person know that they're not just part of this glob, of this blob, but they are an individual who is of importance, who makes a difference, who is a necessary component that we have. Su'u et rosh, it's literally lifting up the heads, right? Lifting the person up, giving them that stature, giving them that, we say even that ma'amad, that standing that they have. It's so interesting, and the terms are always used, right? That person has standing, right? Meaning that person has a position of prominence, of importance, of contributing in a significant way. That person has standing. Su'u et rosh. So we lifting up the heads of kol adap b'nei Yisroel, right? Of each member of Israel. And then we move on. If you'll turn to page 732, the second chapter, all of a sudden we have over here, Ish al Diglo, each person according to their flag, Ba'otot Levet Avotam, his banner, the insignias of the father's household, right? And, it's interesting. Take a look over here in the English, 732. Go down, we have the explanations. The second column over there, next to the number 2, chapter 2, number 2, Diglo Ba'otot, his banner according to the insignias. Each 3-tribe formation had a distinctly colored banner. So we're taking the 12 tribes and we're arranging them around the Mishkan. We have 3 in front of the Mishkan, 3 to the left, 3 to the right, and 3 behind. The tribes were divided up in the same manner that the tribes were divided when they carried Yaakov, out of Egypt after he had passed away and was being brought to Israel, being brought to Hebron, to Ma'arat HaMachpelah, to the tomb of the patriarchs to be buried. Yaakov gave instructions about how he should be carried by his 12 sons. Which 3 in the front, which 3 to this side, which 3 to that side, which 3 behind. And that is in the same formation that we traveled in the Midbar with this Mishkan. So we had these 4 Degalim, each Degal comprised of 3 tribes. There was a banner for each Degel, and each individual tribe had its own flag with an insignia of its distinctive characteristic. The color was the same as the stone on the color, we'll see in a moment, Cheryl, on the Kohen Gadol's breastplate. Okay? The Kohen Gadol had 12 stones on his breastplate. Each one had the name of a tribe written upon it. So each stone was aligned with one of the tribes, and their flag was the color of their stone. According to the Medrash, we continue here, the tribal flags were as follows. Ruvain was red. Its insignia was dudaim. If you remember, dudaim were the flowers that Ruvain had brought to his mother Leah, right? The flowers he brought to his mother in Genesis. Shimon was green, with an embroidered representation of the city of Shechem. Fascinating. Shechem was the city that, much to his father's chagrin, he wiped out the inhabitants after they had taken and violated Dinah. But we are recalling that there was a certain loyalty that he showed to his sister in doing what he did. Levi's was white, black, and red with an Urim Vitumim. Interesting. Judah was sky blue with a lion. Yisachar was blue-black with a sun and a moon. He was famous for many scholars who calculated the orbits of the heavenly bodies to fix the calendars. Zevulun was white with a ship, right? Zevulun was the sailor, the merchants. Dan's was sapphire with a snake. That's what we say, that he was like, he was in the back and he would protect. And of course, the judge Shimshon, right, was from the tribe of Dan, and he brought down that whole amphitheater on his torturers by the end of his life. Gad was gray, Gedud, with a battalion of soldiers. Naphtali's was pale red with a doe, right? Naphtali was very fast. Asher was the color of flaming oil with an olive tree. Asher's area was blessed with the olives. Both flags of Joseph's tribes, meaning his two sons Ephraim and Manasseh, were jet black. Ephraim's had an ox, and Manasseh had a ram of sorts. Benjamin's was a mixture of all the other colors with a wolf. Interesting. So each one had their own flag. And when they became a formation of three tribes in each place, each tribe, each formation, each degel had its own flag also. And actually, this is very, very important and very telling, that they were in this circular formation around. The Medrash, I'm writing about this in this week's newsletter. The Medrash says that we had seen the angels with their Degalim, so to speak, with their formations, and we were jealous of that. And we also wanted our flags. Now, it seems a little bit strange, right? You know, the kids have their flags of Simchas Torah, but most adults aren't jealous. Oh, I also want to have a flag on Simchas Torah. Why do they have flags and I don't have a flag, right? So Rav Dester explains that the idea of the formation and the flags is something that the Gemara itself talks about in the world to come. Let me get a Gemara 1 second. The Gemara at the end of Tanit gives us a description of how things are going to look in the world to come. And the Gemara there says that atid lavo, in the world to come, atid HaKadosh Baruch Hu la'asot machol l'tzadikim. This is Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph 31a in Tanit, very last Gemara. In the future, God is going to make a circle for the tzadikim, for hu yoshev beinehem, and he will sit in the midst of them in the Garden of Eden, and each one mar'eh be'etzba'o will point with his finger, and they'll say, Zeh Hashem kivinu lo, nagila v'nismecha b'yeshuato. This is the God that we hope for. We'll rejoice and exult with his redemption. So the idea of the tzaddikim being in a circle in the world to come, and the idea that the malachim were in this circular formation of Degalim, and that we wanted to be in that circular formation of Degalim surrounding the Mishkan, surrounding God's presence. The property of a circle is every point on the circle is equidistant from the center. And we just read about all these different flags because they had all these different pursuits. Each tribe had its own pursuit, had its own kochot, its own unique abilities, its own area of expertise, its own that they made to Klal Yisrael. And the idea of a circle that we would jealous, we saw the angels, each one was doing its part, its best, and no one was considered better or above another one. As long as each was playing its role, then each was equal, Kulam ahuvim, kulam burim, kulam kiburim, kulam asim be'ima v'yira, ritzon konam. They're all beloved because they're all doing with love and with awe, ritzon konam, the will of their master. And we saw that by the angels, and we wanted to know the same for us. Whether I was a Yisachar who was learning Torah, or whether I was a Zvulun who was going out onto the merchant ships, whether I was an Asher who was making the oils, or I was Dan, right, or God and offering troops, whatever it was, the role that I'm playing is dear to God and equally important to God as anyone else. And that's the idea of a machol, of a circle, that everyone is equidistant from the center point. But also when we make a machol, we dance in a circle. So what's happening is we're going around in a circle. And therefore, I'm standing where you had stood, and then I'm standing where the other person had stood. Everyone keeps standing in one another's places. And that Rav Dessler explains, that teaches the idea, that demonstrates the idea of the recognition of my importance and of your importance. Meaning when you have a symphony orchestra, each person playing is so skilled and is making such a contribution, but it's only each of them playing together with everyone else that turns this from a solo into a symphony. And the symphony is what is just so uplifting and can be so overwhelming when they're all working together. And you have the person who every 5 minutes goes bang, and you have the person who's away on their violin furiously. But each one is a necessary component, and the banger and the violinist, each one appreciates what the other one is doing. That's the circle that we work our way around. So this Sefer Pekudim, this Bamidbar, as we're going into this desert to become this Am Hashem, become this nation of God, become this Torah-bearing nation of God, we have to recognize this idea of the Degalim, that we have to utilize our kochot, appreciate our kochot, utilize our kochot, recognize that if we're using our kochot to the best of our abilities, then we are like Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. We're like the patriarchs and the matriarchs, because nothing can be demanded from us more than to use our abilities to the best of our ability. And if we do that, we're at the top of our game. At the same time, this circle allows us to make sure that we appreciate all the others and recognize that we are in this together. And we can't go at it alone as a nation. We can't be swayed by the other nations, but we have to be uplifted by our nation and recognize that we are an Am, we are a nation, we are together, and only together can we bring about that Kabbalah Torah, that acceptance of the Torah, and that fulfillment of the Torah and the fulfillment of all that the Torah says that we can and will bring to the world. All right. Yasher Koach, my friends. Good seeing both of you.
What a wonderful, wonderful class. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for joining.
Goodness.
Good seeing both of you. We'll have a lunch and learn
Oh, yeah?
Thursday at 12:30. And hopefully we'll have a few more people showing up. We shall see.
Wonderful.
But it's great seeing both of you. And
Thank
Esther was here for a while also. Okay. A good day, everybody.
you too. Thank you.
Thank you.